"Sir, your late wife is still alive." The toddler whispered it so softly that Dorian Vane almost believed the words had come from somewhere inside his own mind. Then the little boy pointed toward the rain-darkened window. Dorian stopped with one hand on the door of his private study. For 12 years, men had feared the silence that came before his decisions. He controlled the largest shipping network on the eastern coast, owned half the nightclubs in Belmere, and commanded an organization powerful enough to make police commissioners lower their voices when speaking his name. He had survived bullets, betrayals, and 3 attempts on his life. But nothing had prepared him for those 7 words. The child sat beside his mother on the polished marble floor, one tiny hand gripping the hem of her black maid's uniform. His name was Milo Vale. He was 3 years old. His mother, Tessa, had worked in Dorian's estate for 8 months. She cleaned the private rooms no other employee was permitted to enter and sometimes brought Milo when the woman who normally watched him was unavailable. Until tonight, Dorian had barely noticed the boy. That was what frightened him most. Milo was not smiling like a child inventing a game. He stared at Dorian with solemn gray eyes, as though repeating something he had been warned never to reveal. "What did you say?" Dorian asked. Tessa's face drained of color. "Milo, don't." The boy pressed closer to her leg, but he did not look away from Dorian. "Your wife," he repeated. "She isn't dead." Every sound in the room seemed to disappear. 12 years earlier, Dorian's wife, Elara, had supposedly died when her car broke through a barrier and plunged from the cliffs north of Belmere. There had been fire. There had been a body too badly burned to identify. There had been a funeral attended by enemies pretending to mourn. Dorian had identified her wedding ring himself. For 12 years, he had carried his grief like a blade beneath his ribs. And now a 3-year-old child was telling him that the woman he had buried was alive. Dorian slowly crouched until he was eye level with Milo. "Who told you that?" Milo looked at his mother. Tessa shook her head desperately. "No one, sir. He says strange things sometimes. He's tired." "Then how does he know I had a wife?" She had no answer. Milo reached into the pocket of his small blue sweater and pulled out a silver key. A faded black ribbon was tied around its handle. Dorian stared at it. Elara used to mark important keys with black ribbon. She claimed labels were too easy for strangers to read. That particular key had once opened the locked drawer in her desk. "Where did you get that?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "The lady gave it to Mama." Tessa closed her eyes. Dorian rose to his full height. "Who is the lady?" Before she answered, every light in the house went out. Darkness swallowed the study. A second later, the security alarm screamed. Dorian's men moved instantly. Footsteps thundered through the corridor. Someone shouted from the western entrance. Then glass shattered downstairs. Dorian seized Milo, pulled Tessa behind the stone wall beside the fireplace, and drew the pistol concealed beneath his jacket. "Stay down." Red emergency lights flickered on. Gunfire erupted near the front hall. Dorian glanced at the silver key still clutched in Milo's fist. The attack had begun at the exact moment the boy revealed his secret. He was no longer wondering whether someone wanted him frightened. He was wondering who had spent 12 years ensuring he believed Elara was dead. "Lock down the estate," he shouted into his radio. "Nobody leaves." His security chief answered through a storm of static. 3 intruders at the western wall. "They're retreating. Take one alive." Dorian turned toward Tessa. "Start talking." She shook so violently that her teeth clicked. "I can't. You brought danger into my home. I was trying to protect her." "Who?" Tessa looked at Milo. The boy had begun to cry silently. Dorian lowered his weapon and carried him away from the windows. "No one is going to hurt your son." "You don't understand," Tessa whispered. "They know where she is now. They'll kill all of us." "Then make me understand." A gunshot cracked outside. Milo buried his face in Dorian's shoulder. The instinct to comfort him came so unexpectedly that Dorian almost resisted it. Instead, he placed one hand over the back of the child's head. "It's all right," he murmured. He had not spoken gently to anyone in years. Tessa watched him, her fear giving way to a fragile decision. "There's an abandoned railway cottage outside Belmere," she said. "A woman lives there under the name Mara." "Who is Mara?" Tessa looked directly into his eyes. Your wife. Dorian stared at her. Behind his ribs, something long frozen cracked open. If this is a lie, it isn't. You saw her. Many times. When? The last time was 6 days ago. His hand tightened around the pistol. Alara had been alive 6 days ago. While he visited a grave containing a stranger's remains, his wife had been breathing somewhere less than an hour from his home. Take me to her. Tessa backed away. Not tonight. You will take me now. That's what they expect. The men outside weren't trying to enter the house. They wanted to frighten us into running to her. Dorian's anger paused beneath the force of her logic. His radio crackled. We caught one, his security chief reported. The others escaped. Our man is wounded, but conscious. Secure him underground. Take his phone, search the grounds, and find out how they cut the power. Dorian carried Milo to a leather chair and set him down. The child still held the key. Give me that. Milo closed his fingers around it. Mama said it's for the man with the sad eyes. Dorian felt the words more sharply than any insult. Tessa knelt beside her son. Milo, give it to him. The boy placed the key in Dorian's palm. It was cold, scratched, and undeniably real. Dorian crossed to an antique cabinet that had belonged to Alara. He pulled open its lowest drawer and removed a narrow wooden box he had not touched since her funeral. Inside were photographs, letters, and the small things he had been unable to burn or display. Beneath them rested Alara's desk drawer, removed from a room before the estate was renovated. The key slid into its lock. It turned. Inside lay a sealed envelope. Dorian recognized his wife's handwriting. If anything happens to me, do not trust the man who stands at your right hand. Dorian read the sentence twice. For 12 years, the man who had stood at his right hand was Lucien Rusk, his advisor, his oldest friend, and the person who had identified Alara's ruined car before Dorian arrived at the cliff. The study doors opened. Lucien entered with 2 armed guards. At 52, he possessed the polished appearance of an ambassador and the patience of a priest. Rain glistened on the shoulders of his charcoal coat. Are you hurt? He asked. Dorian closed his hand over the note. No. Lucien's gaze moved to Tessa and Milo. It remained on the boy a fraction too long. We captured one attacker. I'll question him personally. No. The single word stopped him. Dorian slipped the letter into his pocket. I'll handle it. Of course. Lucien studied his face. What happened in here? A frightened child said something foolish. Tessa lowered her eyes. Lucien smiled at Milo, but there was no warmth in it. Children often do. Milo hid behind his mother. Dorian saw it. Lucien had been present at Dorian's wedding. He had carried Alara's coffin. When Dorian nearly destroyed the organization during the violent months after her death, Lucien had taken control until he recovered. If Alara's warning referred to him, then the man had not merely betrayed Dorian. He had built the last 12 years of their lives upon a grave. Double the guards, Dorian ordered. Nobody leaves without my permission. Lucien gave a slight bow. I'll see to it. After he left, Dorian waited until his footsteps vanished. Then he looked at Tessa. Tell me everything. Tessa's connection to Alara had begun 9 months earlier at a public clinic in the poorest quarter of Belmere. Milo had developed a fever, and Tessa had arrived after the clinic stopped admitting patients. A quiet woman in a brown coat persuaded the doctor to examine him and paid for his medicine. 3 days later, the woman appeared outside Tessa's apartment. She introduced herself as Mara and offered Tessa employment at the Vane estate. You didn't think that was suspicious? Dorian asked. I did, but she knew things about you no newspaper had ever printed. She knew your mother called you Dory when you were little. She knew about the scar below your left shoulder. She knew you hated roses because they reminded you of the hospital where your mother died. Dorian said nothing. Tessa continued. She asked me to find out whether Lucien still controlled your appointments, your security schedules, and the accounts connected to the northern docks. I refused at first. Then she showed me a photograph. What photograph? You were asleep beside her. She was holding the camera. You looked happy. Dorian remembered the photograph. It had been taken during their first winter together, before power and blood had swallowed every ordinary part of his life. Why didn't she come herself? She said Lucien had people inside the estate. Anyone approaching you directly would be watched. And she trusted a maid with a child? She trusted that no one important ever truly looks at servants. The accusation landed cleanly because it was true. Dorian looked at Milo. How did he learn who she was? Mara never told him. But Milo saw an old portrait of her in the upstairs corridor. Yesterday, he pointed at it and said, "That's the train lady." I told him never to say it again. But children hear the truth even when adults whisper, Dorian said. Tessa's eyes filled with shame. I'm sorry. Dorian turned away from her. Why did Alara fake her death? She didn't. He looked back sharply. The crash was meant to kill her, Tessa said. She survived because the car became trapped on a ledge below the road before it fell into the sea. A fisherman found her. She had burns, broken bones, and no memory of who she was. Dorian's face became still. How long? Nearly 3 years. 3 years lost to injury and confusion. 9 more spent hiding. Why didn't she return after her memory came back? She tried. The first message she sent was intercepted. The fisherman who saved her was murdered the next morning. His wife disappeared. Mara realized someone close to you was watching every road leading home. Why wait 9 more years? She was collecting proof. Proof of what? That the same people who tried to kill her were stealing from you, using your shipping routes to move weapons, and trafficking victims without your knowledge. Dorian's stomach turned cold. His organization smuggled contraband, bribed officials, and extorted men who deserved little sympathy. But he had forbidden human trafficking from the day he took power. His father had sold vulnerable people as though they were cargo. Dorian had killed him for it. If Lucien had revived that business beneath his name, then death would be the smallest part of his punishment. Tessa, where is Alara? At the railway cottage near a village called St. Oris. Exact location. She shook her head. She made me promise not to take you there until she sent a message. The attack changes that. It proves she was right. It proves we're out of time. A faint knock sounded from inside the wall. Tessa grabbed Milo. Dorian aimed his weapon toward the fireplace. The knock came again, 3 taps, a pause, then 2. He lowered the gun. Alara had created that signal during their first year of marriage. 3 taps for danger, 2 for trust. Dorian pushed aside a panel beside the bookshelves and opened a passage built for escape during sieges. A woman stepped from the darkness. Her hood was drawn low. A pale scar crossed the right side of her face and disappeared beneath her collar. Dorian forgot how to breathe. She removed the hood. Her hair, once long and black, had been cut to her shoulders and threaded with silver. Time and suffering had altered her features, but not her eyes. Green, steady, and filled with a pain that mirrored his own. Alara. Her name broke in his throat. She stared at him as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and discovered that none of those imagined meetings had prepared her. You kept the cabinet, she whispered. Dorian crossed the room. He stopped inches from her, afraid that touching her would awaken him beside the grave where he had spent 12 winters apologizing to a dead woman. Alara lifted a trembling hand and placed it against his cheek. He closed his eyes. Warm. She was warm. Dorian pulled her into his arms. For one raw second, the most feared man in Belmere ceased to exist. There is only a husband clutching the woman he had loved, buried, mourned, and somehow found again. Alara held him tightly, but when he tried to kiss her, she turned her face. The rejection cut through his relief. You're alive, he said. Yes. And you stayed away. Her eyes hardened with old hurt. I stayed alive. Dorian released her. Tessa quietly carried Milo into the adjoining room, closing the door behind them. Alara removed a small drive from beneath her coat. Lucien knows I'm here. How did you enter? The passage opens beyond the southern wall. I designed it, remember? I remember everything. No, Dorian. You remember the woman I was. She no longer exists. And whose fault is that? The question emerged harsher than he intended. Alara's expression changed. Dorian immediately regretted it, but grief and fury had been growing inside him for 12 years. They had nowhere gentle to go. You could have found a way, he said. One message. One sign. I sent 7 messages. I received none. I came to the estate 4 years ago. He stared at her. Lucien met me at the southern gate, she continued. He showed me photographs of you ordering the execution of men who had supposedly searched for me. He told me you discovered I survived and decided I was too dangerous to bring home. You believed him? For 3 hours. Then I saw fear in his eyes and understood the photographs were staged. But his men followed me. 2 people died helping me escape. You should have come through the gate and screamed my name. And if he had corrupted you? If grief had turned you into your father? The comparison struck him like a slap. Alara held up the drive. I needed the truth before I risked approaching you. You watched me for years. I watched Lucien. You were simply always beside him. Dorian turned away, ashamed of how accurately the words described his blindness. Why come tonight? Because he ordered Milo killed. Dorian looked toward the adjoining room. Alara explained that one of Lucien's accountants had discovered Tessa copying doc records. The accountant had followed her to St. Oris and recognized Alara. Tonight's attack had been intended to eliminate the maid and her child, while making it appear that Dorian's enemies had targeted his estate. How many people inside the house belonged to Lucien? Dorian asked. At least 6, possibly 9. Dorian removed his radio. Alara seized his wrist. He controls the security channel. Dorian studied the device and placed it on the desk. What's on the drive? Cargo records, payments, photographs, and lists of officials he owns. Enough to destroy his network. Then why hasn't he killed me? Because he needs your name. Half the organization follows you out of fear. The other half follows you because you have rules. Lucien has no rules. Without you, the empire would fracture, and his trafficking routes would become exposed. Dorian's mouth twisted. So I became the respectable mask for a monster. You became what you always feared. He accepted the truth without defending himself. A voice sounded through the estate's speaker system. Dorian, Lucien. The doors locked automatically. Alara reached for her weapon. Lucien continued. You have something that belongs to me. Dorian glanced at the drive. You'll have to be more specific. Send Alara to the front hall. Hearing Lucien speak her name after 12 years made Dorian's rage dangerously calm. And if I refuse? I begin killing your staff, 1 person every 2 minutes. A gunshot echoed through the speaker. Someone screamed. Alara moved toward the hidden passage. Dorian blocked her. No, people will die. He'll kill them whether you surrender or not. He wants the evidence. He wants every witness erased. Dorian opened the hidden passage and led them through a narrow stone corridor. He had used it only once, during an attack 10 years earlier. At the first junction, he pressed a concealed switch that opened a view into the security room. 2 guards lay dead beside the monitors. Lucien's men controlled the estate. Dorian studied each screen. The loyal staff had been gathered in the ballroom. Tessa and Milo remained in the study, protected for the moment by reinforced doors. Alara pointed to a monitor showing the cellar. The prisoner your men captured. He may know Lucien's plan. They moved through the passage until they reached the underground holding area. Dorian emerged behind a guard and struck him unconscious before the man could turn. The captured attacker was tied to a chair, blood soaking his sleeve. He looked up and laughed when he saw Alara. The dead queen finally came home. Dorian pressed the barrel of his pistol beneath the man's chin. How many? Enough. Dorian fired into the floor beside his foot. The man flinched. Try again. 12 inside. Another 8 outside. Lucien's escape route? The attacker smiled. He doesn't intend to escape. By sunrise, he'll own everything. Alara examined the man's tattoo, a broken crown surrounding a black star. This isn't Lucien's organization, she said. No, the prisoner replied. It belonged to your father. Dorian went still. His father, Alaric Vane, had died 20 years earlier. Dorian had watched him bleed out on the floor of a warehouse after discovering the cages where women and children were held. That organization was destroyed. The prisoner grinned. Organizations don't die. They change leaders. Who? The man glanced toward Alara. Her brother. Alara's face emptied of color. Dorian turned to her. You told me your brother died when you were 17. I believed he did. The prisoner laughed. Cashin survived the fire. Lucien found him, raised him, and taught him exactly who to blame. Blame for what? Dorian demanded. For the death of his parents. Alara stepped back against the wall. Her parents had died when a bomb destroyed their home. The attack was blamed on one of Alaric's rivals. The prisoner looked at Dorian. Your father ordered it. Cashin learned the truth. He decided the Vane family would lose everything before he killed its last son. And Alara? Collateral damage until Lucien realized she could lead him to hidden accounts belonging to her father. Alara shook her head. My father was a schoolteacher. Your father laundered money for Alaric Vane. He kept records. Lucien thought you had them. Dorian saw the pieces at once. Alara's crash had never been solely about killing her. Lucien wanted to search her belongings without suspicion. Her death broke Dorian emotionally, allowing Lucien to take control of the organization. When she survived, he kept her isolated and used Dorian's grief as both shield and weapon. Where's Cashin? Alara asked. The prisoner smiled toward the ceiling. A new voice came through the speaker. Right above you, sister. The cellar door opened. A tall man stood at the top of the stairs, flanked by 4 armed guards. He had Alara's green eyes. Cashin descended slowly, carrying no visible weapon. A burn scar covered his left hand. Alara stared at him. Cass! For the first time, the confidence left his face. Hello, Lara. She took one step toward him. Dorian caught her arm. Cashin noticed. You still protect him, he said bitterly. After everything his family did to ours. He isn't his father. He inherited the Empire and changed its rules. Cashin laughed. Rules? He kills men and calls himself merciful because he refuses to sell children. Dorian did not argue. Cashin's hatred contained truth, but truth did not excuse what he had become. You arranged the crash? Alara asked. I ordered Lucien to bring you to me. He decided a grieving Dorian would be easier to control if the world believed you died. By the time I learned what he had done, you had disappeared. You hunted me. I searched for you. You murdered the fisherman who saved my life. Cashin's jaw tightened. Lucien told me the fisherman was holding you for ransom. And his wife. I never found her. Alara looked at Dorian. They understood simultaneously. Lucien had manipulated them all. A shot came from the stairwell. One of Cashin's guards fell. Lucien appeared behind him with a pistol pressed against Cashin's skull. Family reunions, Lucien said. Always so exhausting. Cashin's remaining guards raised their weapons, but more men appeared behind Lucien. Drop them, he ordered. Cashin looked at his sister. Then he released his gun. Dorian did not. Lucien smiled. You were always stubborn. You kept her from me for 12 years. I gave you 12 years of power. You used my name to traffic people. I expanded a business you were too sentimental to understand. And Cashin, a damaged boy with a famous father's hidden fortune. Useful, but increasingly difficult. Cashin's eyes filled with murderous comprehension. You said, Dorian, order the bombing. I said what you needed to hear. Lucien motioned with his weapon. The drive, Alara. She held it up, slid it across the floor. Alara looked at Dorian. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Lucien noticed. You're in no position to negotiate. I am, Alara replied. She snapped the drive between her fingers. Lucien's smile vanished. This is one copy, she said. The remaining files will be delivered to 3 investigative offices if Tessa fails to enter a code before sunrise. Lucien fired. Dorian dragged Alara aside as the bullet struck the wall. Cashin lunged backward, knocking Lucien into the guards. Gunfire exploded through the cellar. Dorian overturned the metal table and shielded Alara behind it. Cashin seized the weapon of a fallen guard and shot 2 of Lucien's men. The prisoner tore one hand free from his restraints and reached for Dorian's ankle. Alara kicked the chair over. Dorian fired at the light above the staircase. Darkness filled the room. Alara, passage, he shouted. She found the hidden panel and pulled Cashin toward it. Dorian followed, firing twice before sealing the wall behind them. They ran through the narrow corridor. Cashin's shoulder bled from a grazing wound. Where does this lead? He asked. The study, Dorian answered. Lucien will be waiting. Tessa and Milo are there, Alara said. Cashin looked at her. The maid child, the child you ordered killed. His face tightened. I ordered them questioned. Lucien changed the order, Dorian said. Just as he changed every order that kept you angry enough to obey him. They reached the study panel. Dorian listened. A child was crying on the other side. He opened it. Tessa stood near the desk with Milo in her arms. Two men faced her, their weapons drawn. Dorian fired before they could turn. One fell. Cashin struck the other from behind. Tessa screamed and shielded Milo's face. It's me, Alara said, rushing to them. Milo reached for her. Train lady. Alara took him, holding the child against her chest. Cashin stared at his sister with the toddler in her arms. Something shifted in his expression, as if the brother she remembered were trapped somewhere behind years of hatred. The speaker crackled again. Lucien's voice filled the room. 3 minutes, Dorian. On the monitor, the ballroom doors opened. Armed men entered among the staff. Dorian scanned the security controls. Lucien had disabled the electronic locks, but the estate had been built before computers controlled its defenses. He opened a cabinet and pulled a brass lever. Steel shutters dropped across the ballroom exits, trapping Lucien's gunmen inside with the staff. What did you do? Tessa asked. Bought us time. They still have weapons. The chandeliers release fire suppression gas. Dorian struck another switch. White vapor poured into the ballroom. The gunmen stumbled as visibility vanished. Dorian's staff, trained for emergencies, dropped to the floor and crawled toward concealed ventilation grills. His loyal guards attacked through the service doors. Cashin watched the screens. You prepared your household for war. I grew up in one. Dorian turned to Tessa. Take Milo through the passage. Follow the blue markings until you reach the garden chapel. I'm not leaving Mara. My name is Alara, she said gently. And you're going. Keep Milo safe. Tessa hugged her, then disappeared into the passage with her son. Cashin looked toward the front entrance. Lucien will head for the northern dock. He has a ship scheduled to depart before sunrise. What cargo? Dorian asked. Cashin did not answer. Alara stepped closer to him. What cargo? 23 people. The air went still. Women? Dorian asked. And children. Dorian's expression transformed. Lucien could take the estate, the money, and the empire. None of it mattered compared with those lives. We go to the dock, he said. Alara caught his arm. That may be what Lucien wants. It no longer matters. It matters to me. He looked at her. For 12 years, Dorian had imagined what he would say if fate returned her to him. He had imagined apologies, kisses, and promises. There was no time for any of them. I will not lose you again, he said. You don't get to decide that alone. I'm your husband. You are my husband. We haven't shared a life for 12 years. The words hurt, but he heard what lived beneath them. She was not rejecting what they had been. She refused to pretend that time had not changed them. Cashin glanced between them. If we survive, you can decide whether you still love each other. Alara looked at her brother. Are you coming? He checked his weapon. Lucien stole my life too. They left through the tunnel and emerged beyond the southern wall. Rain had turned the earth to mud. A black car waited near the chapel. Tessa stood beside it with Milo and 2 loyal guards. Dorian stopped. Why are you still here? Tessa handed him a phone. The evidence has been sent. Every file. Alara stared at her. It wasn't supposed to release until sunrise. I changed the timer after the attack. I thought we might not survive that long. Dorian almost smiled. You chose the right maid. I chose her because she was brave, Alara said. Milo leaned from the car window. Mr. Sad Eyes. Dorian approached him. The boy pressed a small wooden train into his hand. So you come back. Dorian closed his fingers around the toy. I'll bring it back to you. The northern dock appeared abandoned when they arrived, but Dorian knew Lucien too well to trust quiet. Cargo containers towered on both sides, creating narrow corridors beneath yellow security lamps. Rain struck the metal roofs like thousands of tapping fingers. Cashin led them to a warehouse beside the water. My people are inside, he said. Your people or Lucien's? Dorian asked. I don't know anymore. Alara took Cashin's uninjured hand. Then choose who you are before we enter. He looked at their joined hands. For years, he had built himself around revenge. Now the sister he believed stolen from him stood alive before him, asking him to become something beyond his pain. Cashin nodded. Inside the warehouse, frightened captives were confined behind a chain-link barrier. 2 armed guards patrolled the floor. Dorian and Cashin moved in opposite directions. Within seconds, both guards were disarmed. Alara found the control panel and opened the barrier. "Stay quiet," she told the captives. "We're getting you out." A woman carrying a sleeping child stared at Dorian's face and recoiled. "You're vain." The shame of his name entered the room before he could answer. "Yes, you did this." "No," he said, "but I allowed the man who did it to operate beneath my protection. That makes me responsible for ending it." He gave her his coat and directed everyone toward the rear exit. Applause sounded from the upper walkway. Lucien stood above them with 6 gunmen. "That almost sounded noble," he said. Dorian positioned himself between the weapons and the captives. "It's finished, Lucien. The records are already with the authorities." "Authorities I own. Not all of them." Lucien's gaze shifted to Cashin. "You disappoint me. You murdered my parents. Alaric ordered their deaths. And you blame Dorian, so I would fund your empire. I gave your anger purpose." Cashin raised his gun. Lucien fired first. The bullet struck Cashin in the chest. Alara screamed. Dorian shot at the walkway as Lucien's men opened fire. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Alara dragged her brother behind a cargo loader. Blood spread across his shirt. "Cass, stay with me." He pressed one hand against the wound. "Get the people out." Dorian fired at the lights, forcing Lucien's men to seek cover. The captives ran toward the rear exit. A bullet struck the chain beside Alara's head. Cashin shoved his pistol into her hand. "Go. I just found you, and I spent too many years trying to destroy your life. You can make it right." A faint smile touched his lips. "I'm starting now." He rose and fired toward the walkway, covering Alara as she ran. Dorian climbed a service ladder and emerged behind 2 gunmen. He drove one into the railing and disarmed the other. Lucien fled toward the loading crane. Below, the final captives reached safety. Dorian followed Lucien onto the rain-soaked dock. A ship waited at the end of the pier, its engines running. Lucien turned and fired. The bullet tore through Dorian's side. He staggered but did not fall. Lucien approached slowly. "You could have ruled an empire," he said. "Instead, you let a dead woman return and make you weak." Dorian looked past him. Alara stood behind a stack of shipping crates, Cashin's weapon in her hand. "No," Dorian said. "She reminded me I was already weak. I trusted you because facing the truth would have required me to change." Lucien followed his gaze. Alara fired. The bullet struck his weapon, knocking it into the water. Dorian drove his shoulder into Lucien's chest. They crashed onto the pier. Lucien reached for a knife and plunged it toward Dorian's throat. Dorian caught his wrist. The blade hovered inches above his skin. "You needed me," Lucien hissed. "I needed someone to blame for the man I became." Dorian twisted the knife away. Lucien rolled toward the edge of the pier and slipped. One hand caught the wet boards. He dangled above the black water. "Dorian," he gasped. "Pull me up." Dorian stood over him. He thought of Alara's empty grave, the murdered fisherman, Cashin's stolen childhood, and the terrified people fleeing the warehouse. Then he thought of Milo, who believed a feared man with sad eyes would return a wooden train. Dorian crouched and seized Lucien's wrist. Surprise flashed across Lucien's face. "You're saving me?" "No, I'm refusing to become you." Police sirens approached from the harbor road. Dorian pulled Lucien onto the pier and pinned him there until officers arrived. Alara ran back to the warehouse. Cashin was still alive, though barely conscious. Paramedics worked over him while she held his hand. Dorian watched from a distance, pressing his palm against the wound in his side. He wanted to go to her. For the first time in his life, he understood that wanting did not give him the right. Alara looked up and reached for him. Dorian crossed the warehouse. He sat beside her as paramedics lifted Cashin onto a stretcher. "Will he survive?" Alara asked. "We're doing everything we can," one answered. They took him toward the ambulance. Alara remained seated on the floor, trembling. Dorian removed the wooden train from his pocket and placed it in her hands. What's this? A reason to return. She looked at him for a long moment. I can't become the woman you buried. I don't want you to. And I can't forget what your family did. Neither should you. I don't know if I can be your wife again. Dorian swallowed the ache those words caused. Then don't be. Her eyes filled with tears. Be Alara, he continued. Whatever that means now. I'll earn the right to know her. 6 months later, the Vane organization no longer existed. Dorian surrendered records that dismantled Lucien's network and exposed officials across 3 cities. He sold his nightclubs and several shipping companies, using the money to compensate survivors and establish protected housing near Belmere. Some called it repentance. Dorian called it debt. Cashin survived surgery and accepted a long prison sentence in exchange for testifying. Alara visited him every Thursday. Their conversations were painful, imperfect, and honest. Tessa became director of the first survivor support residence. She refused the mansion Dorian offered her and accepted a modest house with a garden instead. Milo visited Dorian often. One bright afternoon, the child sat on the steps of the railway cottage while Dorian repaired the wooden train he had carried through the night at the docks. Alara emerged with 2 cups of tea. She had chosen to keep the cottage. It was the first place that belonged to the woman she had become rather than the woman everyone expected her to be. Dorian visited only when invited. He no longer arrived with guards. Milo took the repaired train and raced toward the garden. Alara sat beside Dorian. You fixed it. I promised I would. You used to think promises were words powerful men gave other people. I was an arrogant fool. You were. Dorian smiled. That sounded almost affectionate. Don't become overconfident. They watched Milo chase a butterfly through the wildflowers. After a while, Alara placed her hand beside Dorian's on the step. Their fingers did not touch. I went to the cemetery yesterday, she said. Dorian's smile faded. I saw the grave. I can remove it. No, I think it should remain. Why? Because someone died that night. She looked toward the horizon. The woman I was. The man you were. The life we thought we would have. Dorian nodded. I spent years hating you, she continued. Then I spent years missing you. Sometimes I did both at once. I never stopped loving you. That isn't enough. I know. She studied him, searching for the demand that would once have followed such a declaration. He made none. Their old love had been fierce, possessive, and filled with secrets. If anything grew between them now, it needed patience more than passion and truth more than promises. Alara moved her hand until her fingers touched his. Dorian looked down. It was not forgiveness. It was not a return to the marriage they had lost. It was a beginning neither of them owed the other. Milo ran back, laughing, and climbed between them. He held up the wooden train proudly. Mr. Sad Eyes fixed it. Alara smiled at Dorian. His eyes don't look quite as sad anymore. Milo examined him seriously. No, the child agreed. But still a little. Dorian laughed, a sound so unfamiliar that Milo laughed too. The evening sun spread gold across the railway tracks, illuminating a road that had once carried Alara away from everything she knew. Now it stretched toward Belmere, open in both directions. Dorian had spent 12 years believing death had stolen his wife. The truth was more difficult and far more merciful. She had survived, and if he wanted a place beside her, he would have to learn how to live.